I'm currently in the middle of working on an internal short film project, and I was building these vines together that are growing out of a character's head. And I thought, it might be a good opportunity to do a really quick tutorial on how to create springy vines that react naturally to one another using bones and a little bit of coding. So there's a couple of little interesting things that you might find useful. You may already know. May not be anything you're interested in, but it might be worth checking out. In this particular scene, what's happening is these vine things are growing out of the character's head, and then these large like glowing grape-like orbs are growing off these vines. So when you see it lifting here, a grape starts, like a glowing grape grows out of that and then hangs off this black thing. Now, all of this is actually built using a number of different layers and bones, but mostly they're just little ink branches that I blew onto paper and then cut out. If you just take a look at them here. So these are just ink blots that I blew and cut out in Photoshop. So there's nothing really special about them. Pretty high resolution. And I'm just using them to create these little viney tendrils. Okay, so the goal here is to create a number of these little branches that come out and spring around. And I've got a number of different things going on, which we'll explore. But if you take a look at, I have this little control object on one of these branches, and it's actually got some bounciness and everything rigged into it. And you can control the bend of the branch via this slider, and these other elements are following along. So maybe I'll take a really nice long one, and we'll isolate it out. So maybe that one, maybe we'll do this one right here. Okay, so this will be the next one we're going to do. I'm going to make it a nice bright color, and I'll isolate the layer. So this is what we'll be working on. Let's pull this over so I can actually see what I'm doing. Great. Now I have a curve filter on here. The reason I have that is because the actual object, when it's put on the gray surface, is I want it to be transparent. And if I have this off, the tone of the paper is actually coming through and darkening the surroundings. Okay, so the first step in creating this is making a new null object. And these are going to function as our bones or joints. So let's make a new null object. And I'm going to call this C joint 01. And I'm going to make this fuchsia, just like the actual tree. There we go. And scale this down. I want it about 50% because these are my actual bones. And each one of these I'm going to name joint 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Now I have a little piece of coding that I've attached to all of these on some of the previous ones. So I have a bend multiplier and a time multiplier, and they're just sliders that I've already made, and I can just show you how to make those really quickly. I'm going to go expression controls, and you'll see why we're doing this in a second. So this will be bend mult, and I'll duplicate that, and this will become time mult. So it's just multiplier. And then on each one of these joints, there's a little bit of code that I've already made that we're going to take a look at really quickly. It's in the rotation. I don't want to go through how I came up with it and everything like that. I just want to show you how it works. So on the joints rotation, I'm working in 2D here, alt-clicking this, pasting this code, and I'll just explain to you what it's doing. And we'll call this C bend because we're dealing with the C plant, C control 01, and C bend angle. This is going to throw me an error because I don't actually have this object made yet, which maybe we'll do right now. I'm going to duplicate this joint, and I'm going to call this C control 01. And then I'll make this yellow, and I'll put its scale to 100. So every plant has one of these as a primary control object, and this is where I hold all the controls that drive it. And in this control object, I have the C bend, which is essentially the bend multiplier, but it's not a multiplier in this case, it's just the bending control. Okay, so we have C bend. Now this may work now. Okay. Oh, it's not a slider, it's an angle controller. So let's go expression controls, angle, we'll call this C underscore bend. Maybe this should work now. Oh, it's looking for B bend. Sorry, I'm just modifying the code here. I should have just done the code from scratch for you. So essentially what's happening on this little joint here is, let's take this bend value, and as you see as I shift it up and down, this joint's rotating, okay? This joint right here. So what it's doing is cBend is the angle control here, the expression angle control. It's that value. And then I'm taking a bend multiplier and a time multiplier. Now the bend multiplier, what that does is it increases or decreases the effect that this controller here has on this object. So I'm essentially stacking, so I can make it so its effect is greater or less depending on which direction I turn this. The time multiplier is changing a value at time, so that if this bend is animated, so let's go here, we'll just start on this frame for instance, and let's open up this effect and then bend, giving it, keyframing it. Let's go to here and then we'll put the bend to key that and we'll put it at 0. Okay, so now what you're going to see is this object or joint is actually rotating. Well, let's just first take a look at what's happening here. Once the bend gets to 113, my joint is at 113. If I decrease my multiplier, I can decrease the effect that this has on it. So if I put it to negative 0.5, it's at 50%, so it's at 56 now. And if I put it at 0.25, negative 0.25, it now goes to 84. So it's like it's 25% of what this actually is. The reason this works is I have the bend multiplier equals 1 plus the effect of the multiplier. And I did 1 because if I didn't do 1 and I left it at 0, this multiplier by default would be 0. And then it would have to, in order just to function normally, it would always have to be at 1. So I decided just to add a 1 to it. 1 plus. So that way it at least is 1-to-1 ratio of what's happening here. And the reason that is, obviously, is if you multiply 113 by 0, it equals 0. If you multiply it by 1, it equals 113. The last thing is the time multiplier. Now with the time multiplier, what I can do is offset the amount of time it takes for this to respond. So if I put this to negative, let's put it to negative 1, it takes a full second before it actually reacts to the keyframe data that's right here. And what you'll see is this works all together to create a spring-like effect and kind of a bouncy movement. Now these values are fairly small and very sensitive, so what you can do is edit these values so it's not 1 to 100, but it's actually 1 to 10. So edit value 1 to 10, edit value 1 to 10, and then the sliders won't be so jumpy. So now that that's done, I'm going to just delete this animation here, and we'll get into the next phase of duplicating these joints. So I just wanted to establish all that code on that joint because each joint has these controls so that I can modify how the joint reacts to the base control object. And this will make a little more sense in a moment. So I'm going to duplicate this joint out. And the nice thing is because I've already named it properly, I don't have to worry about sequencing it or going through and specifically numbering everything. So I'm just going to duplicate these joints. I'm going to try to keep I don't want too many joints, but I want to make sure they're in key spots on the actual rig here, or on the actual vine. Oops. Now I should lock down this branch so I don't accidentally move it. Now this one may end up having quite a few little bones. Okay, that's 9. And then the last one there. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is create all the little pins to go in this thing. So let's pull that guy up here. Actually, let's unlock this and put this above. I don't know why I put it under here. Okay. So now it's time to add the puppet pins that will control this object. And let's add some pins here. Zoom in. And remember, the pins are going to fix to the top left corner of the null object. Okay. And if you see one that's maybe in a wrong spot or should be adjusted, just grab that null object. Like this one here should be a little higher. And then continue to add pins after the fact. Here we go. That one should probably be a little bit further in. This one should be here a bit. There we go. Let's go back to this. Adding more pins. This one has a lot of joints. Okay. Okay, so we have all those pins in place. Now the next thing to do is to attach the code to those pins so that the pins track to the null objects. So I'm just going to grab the code from another object that I have because I can never remember the code. I just want to stop the video really quickly and point out the code that I'm actually using because I just sort of glazed over it and didn't really go into any depth on it. What this code does, if for those of you who haven't seen the other videos that I've done, is it tells the puppet pin to follow a specific layer's anchor point. So essentially what I'm doing is I've just pasted this chunk of code in and I'm replacing everything on the top line, everything between the equal sign of n equals and then everything after that, thisComp.layer dot blah blah blah, everything between the equal sign and the semicolon, I pull out and delete and replace with the layer that I want to track. So to do this, what you can do is just highlight everything from thisComp.layer on all the way to the semicolon and leave the semicolon in, and then just use your pick whip to select the layer you want to replace that with, and then the code works perfectly. If this doesn't make sense, try checking out a couple of the other videos that I've done on making bones for puppets in After Effects. Now the cool thing is because we numbered these very specifically, each one of these pins will actually correspond to an existing joint number. So we're not going to have to worry. It's going to be quite easy to modify this code. So I'm going to alt-click on here, paste this, and it's actually going to correlate to C joint, I believe it's 14, hopefully. So we'll just take a look up. Should be this last one. There it is. So let's just paste this, paste. I know this is a little bit annoying. It'd be nice to develop an application just to do this automatically. Okay, let's put this to 11. And because I numbered this so well in my labeling, this really isn't that hard to do. It's just moderately tedious. I mean, you could reduce the amount of effort here just by not putting so many joints, but the more joints you have for this particular application, the better the vine will bend. All right, I'm just going to speed this up so you don't have to watch me fill in each and every one of these. The process is the same. And finally, 0, 1. Okay, now all these pins are in place. We're going to be doing some modifications on the actual mesh in just a moment here. But the main thing just to check now, which should be working, should not be an issue, is that these pins are actually following, which they are. Great. So my next thing I want to do is parent these joints. So each one of these joints should parent to the one in front of it or below it. Okay. Let's move it along here. It's working pretty good. Not so complicated. Joint 1. And joint 1, I'm going to parent to the controller so that when I rotate the controller, it rotates the whole tree. So let's just have a quick look here. Everything should go with it. Now the last thing I'm going to do is actually parent the ink branch itself to the control object as well, so that when everything's rotating and moving around, this doesn't get displaced. And it can just make for some funky results. So let's just have a look. Already we're getting some pretty cool results. It's a pretty neat twist. Now the one problem I run into, and this is just because I'm not that particular about these because they grow so quickly, but you actually are seeing this white or this empty spot in between here. That's because the actual ink object, I didn't crop right to the edge of the black. So the alpha channel sits outside along the edges. So that's why you're seeing that weird overlap. And you can fix that by having a less complex branch and cutting right to the edge. But I didn't really care about that specifically for this because it's not going to be folding this much. And I'm also not really worried if it does have a little bit of this because they move so quickly. One of the things that we're already seeing here is the bend. For me, it's not, the bend isn't really quite happening the way I want it to. So this is why I made those wonderful little adjusters. Because I actually created all these cool little bend multipliers, I can interactively right off the bat change how much this joint is affected by that controller, so I can get much more of a bend I want. And my plan is to animate this thing all curled up back here and then have it sort of unwhip like that. Okay, so I can even do that animation right now. So let's put it at maybe 60. And let's go into U, delete this keyframe. So let's unfold it over the course of, for let's say 1 second, because I'm also going to do something else which might be interesting to you in a moment here. And we'll have it go to 0 just for now, because we're going to do a little bit more detailed animation in a moment. And I'm also going to drop the resolution down here because things are chugging a little bit. Okay, there we go. It's unfolding. Now, what I'm not really liking is this end. Like when I'm in this position, I'd almost want things to be curled more. So the way we can do that is actually go here and start increasing the bend multiplier as we move along this chain, which will allow me to curl this more to get the results I'm actually looking for. Now I want to curl this one. I'm going to go down more here. And this is actually pretty sweet because to do this manually and get things to work would just take forever. And even though, yeah, it's been a little bit of effort to set this up, comparatively speaking, it's really not that bad. Maybe it requires a bit of code. And if you're not comfortable with code, I can understand how this might be a really unappealing process. Okay, and that last joint we can't do anything with because it's an end joint, and bending it and turning and rotating it doesn't do anything. Okay, so now what we can see is we're getting a much nicer curl happening. You see that? Just by using those modifiers. Now there's one in here as it gets tighter. I think this one I want to increase more. There we go. That's better. And increase this guy a little bit more. There. Now, really cool. There we go. Sweet. And what I'll also do is maybe increase this guy here. Just increase that because I want that to sort of bend. Now the other cool thing about using these sliders is I can actually animate this property. So if I find that once it's unfolded, and let's say I'm over here, and I want the angle to go down, and I find this one's reacting too much, I can always keyframe this bend multiplier, and then on this frame turn it off, so that when I'm actually animating this guy further, it goes back to its original multiplier. So it's really, it's actually quite great to have this power. I'm going to just delete that for now. Okay, great. So the next thing to do here is I'm going to add a little springiness to this. And to do this, you can do this in a couple of different ways. So let's close all these guys down. I think they're adjusted the way I need them. First of all, we're going to create an animation spring on our own. Okay, so let's make this move really quite fast. So it's going to unravel, and then I'm going to set the angle to 10, or sorry, to -10, and I'm going to scoot forward a set frame rate. This is how I usually set up bounces, like quick ones. So I'm going to move ahead, let's say 10 frames. So I'm just shift page down, and then I'm going to set this to 8, and then move ahead 10 frames, negative, let's go 7, 10 frames, positive 6, 10 frames, negative 5, 10 frames, positive 3, whoops, not 3, 36, 3, 10 frames, negative 2, 10 frames, 1, 10 frames, negative 0.5, 10 frames, positive 0.5, or I could do 0.4, 10 frames, negative 0.2, 10 frames, positive 0.1, and then 10 frames, and then 0. This is a really long one. So what I'll do is I'm just going to keyframe assistant, easy ease that, and then just alt click and drag these to make it happen faster. But this is quite a huge springiness. So right now what I've done is I've created sort of this springy movement. Let's have a look at it really quickly. There we go. It's perhaps a little melodramatic, but that's okay. It gets the point across. So you see it's a huge movement. So already that's working pretty well, and it didn't take very long to animate. So then the next thing I can do is I'm going to use that time offset thing we talked about. So I want these end bones to follow along slower than these first bones, sort of like a whip, like they're trailing behind a little bit. So to do that, it's really quite simple. I'm going to select the top joint, this one here, the top one that affects anything. Like this guy technically doesn't need anything, but I leave it in here just in case I might attach something to it later. So I just leave it in here because it's not hurting anything being there. So joint 13, I'm going to make the time multiplier negative 0.1. Okay, and then I'm going to move down. As I go down, this will be not 0.9, sorry, negative 0.09. Negative 0.08. And you'll see what this does in just a second. Negative 0.07. What this is essentially doing is this is going to grab the rotation value of this main rotator here at negative 0.06 seconds after the fact. So it's going to drag behind a little bit. This will be 0.05, negative 0.05. Whoops. Negative 0.04. Control down. Negative 0.03. If you want to move down your object list without having to use your mouse, just press Control and the up and down arrow. Negative 0.02. And then what I'll do is start tapering this off a little bit. Negative 0.015. And then negative 0.01. And then Control 1. Negative 0.005. There you go. Let's have a look at what this does now. So now there's much more of a wobbliness that's happening to this. You can see there's sort of this secondary motion happening, even though it's quite dramatic and the movement's pretty extreme. But you can see that there's actually a wobbliness happening in there because these end bones, these end joints are progressively getting slower and slower and looking further and further behind. So they're reacting after the fact. So they become secondary motion as they move along. The next thing we're going to touch on here is just cleaning up the actual puppet tool on this object. Now, I want it to be on transparent because as you can see, I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's like these little specks happening everywhere. I'll just put this to half really quick. And that's because the actual puppet mesh is cutting off some of the actual image. So if we're to look at this, I'm just going to select the pin. So there's actually little bits here that aren't included in this mesh, which are being cut off. The one thing I want to do, though, is because this is such a loose object, I want it to bend round, like fairly round. What I can do is increase the mesh expansion. So I'm putting this into a more extreme pose. And what I'll do is, because I have lots of pins, it sort of works out. If you had much less pins, you could just increase the expansion. But I'll put it on transparent, and that'll get rid of those little black dots. And then the other thing I'm going to do is increase the expansion, which right now is at 0. I'll put it to like 5. And I have a lot of pins. If you have tons of pins and you increase this number too high, it starts acting weird because each pin's effect radius actually starts impacting each other and they start stacking on top of one another. So you get this weird bubbliness happening. So let's just have a look and see what this does. Seems like I lost a bit of my mesh up here. So let's put this to 2. Oops. Let's go down here. Again, I lost this. Put this expansion to 2. I lost a whole bunch of that. Yeah, okay. So it's because I have so many pins, I don't really need to round it off. If you were to use, let's say you only had 4 pins, put your expansion really high and you'll get a nice curved edge on there. I don't need to really increase my expansion too much, but what that'll do is it softens up the deformations. And it also increases the distance that this mesh moves outside of the alpha channels. So let's just render this out, have a look at it. I think that's moving really, really well. Now, there's one last thing I want to touch on, which is a really fantastic plugin. It's Dueck Tools, and you can actually grab this and download it. Just Google it. Google Dueck, and this right here, maybe Dueck version 13.0.2. And this is what I actually use to create IK for a lot of characters. It is an amazing, amazing tool, and it's absolutely free. I really strongly recommend, if you are making money doing this kind of work, you should at least donate. So what does this tool do? What can we do with this? Well, we have this wicked, awesome spring thing here. And what I can do is let's delete all this wonderful bounciness that we programmed in there. And let's just put this to 0. Okay, so we're going to animate this, and I'm going to control click it so it's a hard flip. So it just stops, okay? Now what I'm going to do is in this bend property, I'm not going to do this. I don't have to do anything to all these other joints because of the way we set this up. But for this one bend property here, I'm going to get rid of this. I don't know why that's there. Delete that. Okay, sorry, that was code left over from something else. We didn't need that. That was the code left over from the joints, and it pulled in the rotation. We didn't need that there. Sorry, I should have taken that out earlier. Okay, what I'm going to do is enable spring on this. I'm going to select the bend. You have to make sure you have to have a keyframe in there. I'm going to click spring. And now watch the wickedness unfold of pure awesome so quickly. We have this spring automatically. Look at that. And now watch this. I can increase the elasticity to 10, the dampening to 2. Let's see what happens now. Like this thing is vibrating forever. It's awesome. So let's maybe put the dampening up to 5 and elasticity to 25. Let's see what happens. You can get an automatic like playing through this thing. Whoops. And see what you're actually getting. And the faster this happens, the more that thing is going to move up and down. And I'm going to turn the damping to 0. And so it'll just like vibrate for days. Let's put the elasticity to 10. And then put the dampening up to 3. So you just play with these numbers and you can start to get a sense of what's actually happening. So you can get really all kinds of different results so quickly. Let's turn the elasticity down to 3 too as well. And the cool thing about this is that because also I have all these great bones in these joints, I can parent other objects to this. I can just pick a joint and parent another object. So, which I have done already on some of the other ones. Let's just close this off. I'm going to lock this guy. And this one I'll leave open. This is my only animation control I need to play with. This thing is, I can control everything to do with this plant, which is wicked. Even I can reposition it. I can put it wherever I want. It all comes with it, and all the animation just sticks. The other thing I can do, which I've been doing in some of the other ones, is you can take one of these branches, for instance, and just parent it to one of the joints. So let's say, which joint do we want? So we're going to attach this to joint 10. Okay. There you go. You see how that's... But now, let me just position it up. I'm going to put it back up over here. So now this guy is stuck onto this thing, and I could add as many you want. I could add Christmas lights. I could add whatever I wanted. And another cool thing you can do, which I actually did to a different branch in the project here, which was... let me just find... I got to find a little piece of code here. So I had to make a special little piece of code right here. Now this little piece of code, really, really simple. If any of you guys are familiar with Maya or any 3D program, there's this constrain objects to existing joints. You can point constrain them so they just follow a joint around, but they don't rotate. Like right now it's parented, so it's inheriting all the rotations and everything. If you didn't want that to happen, for instance, let's just take this ink branch, turn off the parenting, and alt-click position, click this little piece of code. Now, essentially L is the layer we want to follow. So we're going to grab that joint number 11, or I think it was 12, joint number 12. Oh, and then make sure this is at 0 and 0, right. You have to make sure that your actual position value is set to 0 and 0, okay? Because what you can do is now I have this parented to this, but it doesn't actually affect its rotation, which is really wicked. So check that out. This thing just hangs there awesomely, and it's not even being rotated by that movement. But then on top of that, I can animate the movement of that object as well, which is very different because if you compare it to Maya, you can't animate something that's been point constrained unless you constrain a parent. And this, I can, just using this little piece of code, I can animate this thing all over the place and still have it constrained to that position. So I can customize that really well. So it's a really neat thing to do. You can do a lot of really great stuff with this. So I just thought I'd show you this. and I'll keep you guys posted on the progress of the Marcel animation and try to do little tutorials like this so you can see some of the processes behind making them. And make sure to check out e.d.Films on Facebook to get the latest news on what we are up to and what we will be releasing next.